All right, readers. So by now you should have completed the phonics goal, working with those suffixes ly, ly, and ful, full. And by now you're just about getting ready for our elements of poetry. Now, this week and next week, you're going to be talking all about poetry. We in class have actually done this before. We've only done it a little bit throughout the week. So it's not something that you should be a master at, but it's something you should be a little bit familiar with. If you hear that word poetry, or even a poem, you should be a little bit familiar with what that means. Now, when we're talking and thinking about poetry, it's important to go from the very beginning and to understand that poetry is just one type of genre. So, nonfiction is a genre, fantasy is a genre, mystery is a genre. Those are all different kinds of stories or kinds of writing. Poetry is the same thing. Poetry is just one kind of writing that you can do. What's really tricky about poetry is poetry has its own rules that no other genre has. When we're writing like an opinion writing, which you guys are doing in writing, poetry doesn't follow opinion writing rules. And poetry doesn't follow nonfiction writing rules. Poetry has its own set of rules. And so today and tomorrow, and a whole lot next week, you guys are going to be learning some of the rules of poetry. From what you can see on my chart here, I have a couple of things that you're going to actually see in that slide that we have. So first, we're going to be talking about line breaks and stanzas. And those are the first two that I want to really focus on. Let's go into a little bit more detail and let's look through our packet. Here's what you guys would be seeing when you open up the day one. You're going to look at a video. Make sure you start with this first because it'll give you an overview of everything you're going to see there. And then the first thing you're going to be seeing are lines. Now, this is important because in writing, we call these sentences. In poetry, they don't really use sentences the same way. You can see here, there is a period, but you can also see it says this poem has 4 lines. That's not like any kind of writing we do. Poetry isn't really interested in having sentences that have periods or question marks or even exclamation marks. Poetry is interested in the lines. That means every time the writer uses a new space, they call that a line. So here we have 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines. That's why this poem has 4 lines, because the writer finished writing here and went on to the next line, went on to the next line, and went on to the next line. That's going to become really important as you start to read more poetry. Poets or poetry writers, they're really, really purposeful. That means they are always thinking about when they want their lines to end. Sometimes they'll have a line that is a couple of words. Sometimes they'll have a line that's just 1 or 2 words. The poem or the poet or the poetry writer, they can make the line as long or as short as they want. It's not the same way with a period or having a complete sentence. All right, so that's the first rule, talking about poems have lines. And we can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. This poem has 4 lines in it. And you can see, really simple, 1, 2, 3, 4. Every row there is a line. The next thing you're going to be talking about with poems, and this is one of my favorite things, is poems have rhyme. If you are a strong reader, you're going to be really good at picking up on the rhymes of poems or even being able to make up your own rhymes. If you don't know, a rhyme is 2 words that sound the same. Hat, bat. Those are rhyme words because they sound the same. Mat, fat. Those are 2 rhyme words because they sound the same. When a word rhymes, or you know a word rhymes, when they have the same ending in them. Mat and fat have the same at ending, so those are rhyme words. Poems love to have rhymes in them, but it's important to know not every poem is going to have a rhyme in it. A lot of them do. Poet writers and poems like to have rhymes, but it's not important or not necessary for poems to have rhymes. It's just something that they sometimes have. What you're going to see here, and this is where it gets really, really complicated. These are some of the rules of how, or these are some of the structures of how poems can rhyme. I'm going to go through these bit by bit. I'm going to go through them pretty slowly because there's brand new things here that we've never learned before. So what I'm going to do first is this. I'm going to read the poem, and then I'm going to explain these marks to you here. All right, let's get into reading this first poem. All right, first thing I notice, 1, 2, 3, 4. I notice that this poem has 4 lines as well. All right, let me read. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch a tiger by the toe. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Now, this is a really familiar one. I've definitely heard and I've said this a bunch of times before. Here's what I've done to make things a little bit easier for you guys. At the end of each line, I highlighted and underlined that last word because those words actually rhyme. Hear it one more time. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Catch a tiger by the toe. If he hollers, let him go. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Now, what you're going to notice is that mo, toe, go, and mo, all of those words rhyme. Mo, toe, go, mo. And they all rhyme because they have the same ending sound, that O sound, but they don't have the same beginning sound. T, g, Their beginning sounds are all different, but their ending sounds are all the same. O. We call this an A rhyme because it follows one rhyme scheme. It follows one kind of rhyme. All four of these words or all four of these lines, they all rhyme. Mo, toe, go, mo. That's one kind of rhyme that poets can use. What you're going to see down here in the second poem is it changes. It becomes A. That tells me that not all the lines are going to rhyme. Watch what happens here. Same thing. This poem has 4 lines. And check this out. I can write a poem for you. It will have a rhyme or two. It might be sad or it might be sweet, but I can promise it won't stink like feet. Hear it one last time. I can write a poem for you. It will have a rhyme or two. It might be sad or it might be sweet, but I can promise it won't stink like feet. Watch what happens here. The AA is referring or talking about these 2 rhyme words. You, too. Those 2 words rhyme. Even though they don't look like they should rhyme, we know they sound the same. You, too. All right. You and two rhyme. That's my A rhyme pattern. And watch what happens over here. Sweet. You too sweet. Yeah, sweet doesn't really work there. Sweet does not rhyme with you or two. But you know what happens? Sweet, feet. Those 2 lines and those 2 words rhyme. So we have to make a new kind of pattern for this poem. It becomes AA because you and two rhyme, and then BB because sweet and feet rhyme. That's really, really different than what we see up here. Mo, toe, go, mo. All 4 of those words rhyme. But down here, it's not all 4 of those words rhyming. It's these 2 and then these 2. You see how that one works? AA, you 2. BB, sweet feet. But watch this, guys. If you look down at the third poem, something completely different happens. You're going to see an A, B rhyme. Check out how this poet makes their words rhyme. My race car goes around and around. Fast as can be. It makes a loud sound, my race car and me. Around and B don't rhyme, and sound and me don't rhyme, but look really carefully and watch what happens. This is an A, B pattern. That means the first A and the third one, the other A, those are the rhyme words. Around, sound. B, me. This writer did a really different kind of pattern. They made the first and the third words rhyme, the second and the fourth words rhyme. It's kind of like they skipped a rhyme. Rhyme, no rhyme. Rhyme, no rhyme. Writers of poetry can make the words rhyme in a lot of different ways. And what you see up here is there's 3 different kinds of patterns that they've done. All 4 words rhyme, the first 2, then the next 2, or they skip 1, 2, 1, 2, or A, B. That is a lot of information, and that can be really, really tricky. So I recommend that you really spend a lot of time reading those over by yourselves and really stressing the rhyme. What I like to do when I'm reading, when I get to that last word of the rhyme, I like to snap. Here on the second poem. I can write a poem for you. It will have a rhyme or two. It might be sad or it might be sweet, but I can promise it won't stink like feet. I like stressing those rhymes so my brain can really, really hear those rhymes, and it'll help me to really identify those patterns. All right, Here's the last thing that I want to talk about for poems, and this can also get a little bit tricky. When we're talking about poems, just like you saw up here, these poems are kind of like they're in chunks. See this chunk a poem, this chunk of a poem, and this chunk of a poem? Now, if this were to all be one poem, going back down here, we would call those stanzas. Now, a stanza basically means that we're taking lines of a poem, see, 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines, and they're chunked together. All of these lines together, similar to like if you were writing a paragraph, all these lines together become something called a stanza. And that's a brand new word, so definitely make sure you practice that. These 4 lines are one stanza. And down here, these 4 lines are one stanza. Now, this poem altogether, because this whole thing is one poem, has 2 stanzas. A stanza does not need to be 4 lines. It can be 5 lines or 6 lines. It can even be 2 lines. It depends on how the poet wants to do it. The important thing to remember and pay attention to, this here. See how there's a space between this and this? That space here, right in the middle, sorry, I don't mean to highlight the word. That space here right in the middle, that tells me, oh, this must be a stanza and this must be a stanza. And that's really important to pay attention to. All right, guys, I'm not going to go any further with this because there's a lot of information, but I want to do a quick recap of some of the things we talked about so far. Firstly, we talked about what poetry is or what a poem is. And now when we're thinking about poetry or what a poem is, it's important to know a poem or poetry is a new kind of genre. It's similar to fiction or nonfiction, but poetry has its own rules. And the rules that we talked about, first, we talked about poems having lines. Each row, 1, 2, 3, 4. Those lines are important because they're kind of like our sentences. 1 line, 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines in this poem. The next rule we talked about were rhymes. Now, if you're struggling with hearing or being able to come up with your own rhyme words, that might be really helpful to practice some rhyme words first before you start going into your reading. And when we're talking about rhymes, we're looking at how words sound the same. Mo, to, go, mo. And we're seeing that if all the words rhyme, we create a kind of pattern. But not every poem is going to rhyme in that same way. Sometimes the writer will want to have the first 2 lines rhyme, then they have the next 2 lines rhyme. Or sometimes they'll mix it up and they'll have a rhyme where they have the first word and a third word rhyme, or the second line and a fourth line rhyme. Poets can mix it up in different ways, and here are 3 examples: an AAA pattern, an AABB, or an ABAB. Those are just 3 examples of how poets can make their words rhyme. And then the last thing we talked about were stanzas, kind of like having a paragraph or a group together where we are putting all those lines and sticking them together to make one stanza. And when we see a space there, we're seeing that there's a brand new stanza. And if we look at this example, there are 2 more stanzas. All right, guys. Definitely make sure you're practicing and going over those a lot. It's not a lot of information and it's not a lot of work for you to really be doing, but there is a lot of reading and a lot for you to be practicing and talking with your big person with. It's brand new for you. There's a lot of new vocabulary words, lines, stanzas, and rhyme. Those are brand new for us, and I want you to really practice those. So make sure you're going really slow and make sure, I know I didn't do it, but make sure you take a look at this video. It's going to be really helpful as well. All right, guys, I'll be around if you have any more questions. Let me know your thoughts. I'll talk to you guys soon.